Hello and welcome to the Scoreboard podcast. I'm your host, Rivka Boord of Jets X Factor, the home of the best New York Jets content on the internet. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com. Use discount code 80. That's Wayne Corbett's discount. And you'll get, again, the best New York Jets content you'll find anywhere. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Cody Alexander of Match Quarters. Cody is like an expert in particularly defensive back play, breaks down cornerback play all the time, defensive play in general. So, Cody, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you joining when I reached out on Substack. Okay, so I guess first start by introducing yourself to our audience a bit. Like, where do you come from? What's your background? What do you do?
Yeah, so I run matchquarters.com. It's pretty much a one-stop shop for anything defense. This is going to be, for the most part, if you are a nerd like I am for defense, this is where it's going to be. There's so many things on offense. There's nothing on defense, and I want to be kind of that beacon of light for all of us darksiders. I am a defensive back coach by trade, started at Baylor in 2011 and kind of spent 10 years at the Texas high school football level, and then eventually just moved on to Match Quarters full-time. So I do football full-time. I have the best job in the United States for sure.
Okay, well, yeah, anyone who can do this full-time is lucky. So I guess what drew me to you is watching your breakdown of Sauce Gardner's technique. And I think Jet fans are not going to be happy to hear this, but Cody had Sauce Gardner ranked as the 10th best cornerback in the NFL last year. So I guess I wanted to ask you first, where did that come from? I saw you had a little bit on how he struggles, particularly in cover two. How did you break that down, and what did you see in Sauce that made you say he's the 10th best?
Yeah, so actually, if you watch that video, those are I work for Field Vision Sports, which is kind of a projected analytics company. We use machine learning and AI, and then we've developed a proprietary metric called Havoc rating. So we can actually play by play. We can actually cut a defender down play by play and give you a better look at what they're doing. So in the raw score, I had him about 10. In our actual like machine learning AI, when we filter it through and clean it up with data scientists that are much smarter than I am, he actually becomes like he's projected to be the number 2 corner overall this year. And he finished as the number 3 corner last year in that new ranking. The reason why he got to be 10th really has to do with he struggles at times when they do run some of their zone concepts. So, and really a lot of times I always give the caveat when you're looking at zone, especially in cover 3 and cover 2, like those are vision reaction, and he is very much a man corner. So he is the number 1 man corner. Also too, when you're not hitting in some of these cover 0 pressures that the Jets run, you got to hang on a long time. And there's just times that he gets caught behind. But in terms of who is the best corner in the NFL, Sauce should be in that list of who is actually at like the top, or at least our current Mount Rushmore of corners in the NFL.
So I'm assuming Jalen Johnson was one of the corners who ranked ahead of him. Who was the other one?
Yeah, so actually, if you look at our rankings, Charvarius Ward was the number 1, was number 2, and then Jalen Johnson was number 1. Jalen Johnson just had so much production in that zone coverage. And what's interesting about this, of those 3, Sauce is the only one that's really a pure man corner. Jalen Johnson is a read, vision, react corner. Charvarius Ward is really kind of a hybrid corner. He's a top 10 in man coverage, but he's really more of a zone killer. And so those 2 are a little different. And that's what makes us a little bit unique at Field Vision, is because we can actually cut these corners out. And I can tell you like who's really good at man, who's really good at zone, and then obviously who's elite at both, which Sauce is.
So that's actually really cool. Yeah, sounds awesome. Jets fans are not going to be happy to hear Charvarius Ward's name, since he kind of snubbed Garrett Wilson, saying, something like, I never heard of him, or I don't know who that is. So fans are not going to be. But he said he's going to travel with Garrett Wilson in week 1. So it'll be interesting to say, because you say he's a good man cover corner. So we'll see how that stacks up. Now, you said you have the data in Sauce. You break down DJ Reed's technique a lot too.
Yes.
What do you see in DJ Reed in terms of man versus zone? where do you, I don't know if you go ranking that far, but where you have him ranked, what did you see from him?
Yeah, DJ Reed probably is one of the more underrated players in the NFL. In fact, Sauce mainly plays on the left, and he is allowed to do that because DJ Reed is on the right. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Sauce does not travel with receivers. There's very few times, maybe when they're in base personnel, they're going up against 12 personnel and he's corner over or he's following receivers. If you look at his heat map of where he aligns and where he plays, it's all on the defensive left. So that kind of gives you an indication of how well they kind of hold, the Jets organization holds DJ Reed. In fact, we have him at Field Vision. We're going to have him as the 8th best corner going into next year. Last year, he finished as the 12th best. He is really good in quarters and really good in cover one. And then what do the Jets run? They run quarters and they run cover one. So he is really good at what the Jets do, and he's a great complement. He's also a different body type. Like, he's more of a smaller corner compared to Sauce. It kind of is long. He's kind of the dream corner that you want in Sauce. But DJ Reed is really the everyman corner. That's what typically a corner looks like. And he's elite in short bursts. He's elite in man coverage. I really like watching him play. He has excellent feet, and that's why you will see I give DJ Reed love. Like, I am probably one of the few that will go out. I think I have a couple of videos on him because I think he's really good. I think he's a technician, and the Jets have arguably one of the best defensive rosters in the NFL. And when you have two corners like that, that just that closes down a lot of things for an offense.
Yeah, so Joe brings up a point. Sauce said that he's going to be traveling with number ones this year. Jeff Ulbrich, the Jets defensive coordinator, kind of walked that back a bit. I mean, Robert Saleh's history indicates that he likes to play his cornerbacks, each one on a side. In fact, it's interesting because DJ Reed, if you look at his stats before he joined the Jets, he was much better on the right side of the defense, and that's kind of why the Jets have him there. It's a weird dynamic, and I guess you could speak to that then. Like, how is it, like, in general, playing on the left side versus the right side? Is it harder to switch, or is it generally like people can play on either side, and that's just the Jets trying to make things as simple as possible?
I would actually say that if you talk to DB coaches and really sit them down, they will tell you that generally you're going to have a corner that favors the right or the left. It's all in the footwork. It's all hand dominance too. Like, for instance, when I played corner, I loved playing on the left. I didn't really like playing on the right. It has everything to do with like being your step offs, where you're planning, driving, things like that. I will say this though about Sauce moving around. When you have two different sizes of corner, you have the ability to then match up. So, like, if you're going to play a taller, bigger receiver, then Sauce can travel with him. DJ Reed can travel with the other guy. So it does not surprise me that Sauce, maybe he said it, and then Ulbricht's kind of walking it back a little bit of like, hey, this is not like an every week thing. This could easily be a matchup thing. And again, like I said, it's not every play that he's playing on the left, but yeah, their corners favor one side or the other. And when you have the ability to then kind of put them in their comfort zone, it just maximizes their play.
Now, the cornerback in the Jets room, okay, DJ Reed is underrated around the league. I mean, Jets fans know how good he is, and Sauce Gardner always talks about how much he looks up to DJ Reed. But then there's the third corner in the room, Michael Carter II, the nickelback. I haven't really seen you break him down so much. Jets fans think that he's one of the best nickels in the NFL. I guess have you looked at his film? Where do you have him ranked among nickels? What do you know about him?
Yeah, Carter is really good. When you talk about nickels, there's just a stack of young guys above him. But he is one of those that is on that list of guys that are, and this is one of the reasons too, where he's a top 30 corner. If you just break him down just in general of like where he sits, he's a top 30 corner. We have him as projected number 27 for next year at Field Vision. That would put him in the top 10 of nickels in the NFL. And I think that that's pretty much where he needs to sit. He's really good against the run. And the thing with him is, like with the Jets, is pass rush. They don't really blitz a lot. And so therefore he's really a coverage first defender, and he does a really good job. He's not like He's not like a Brian Branch that really excels at man coverage, or kind of a McDuffie that is really good at rushing the passer, or even a guy like McCreary with the Titans that is elite near the box. He's great at run. He can also add in. So to me, that's kind of what dings him a little bit. But in terms of just coverage, he's an adequate slot defender. They have really good safeties at the Jets. They're playing a lot of quarters or cover one, so he has the opportunity. He usually has somebody, because of proximity towards the box, somebody capping him, meaning somebody on top of him. So like I said earlier, the Jets have one of the best defensive rosters in the NFL. It's just now, can the offense figure it out? I think at this point, and I'm sure that every Jets fan is just kind of like holding on for it, because everything is aligning, but it's just, can they put it all together? Defensively, I think they're there.
Okay, so now I wanted to ask you, just in general, how much of what you do is based on interceptions? Where do you think interceptions fall into like importance for defensive back play, for cornerback play specifically?
Okay, I think interceptions are important. Okay, I think that if you were going to put a point value total to them, I mean, it would be pretty much over what a field goal would be worth for an offense, because you're essentially killing a play, and then you're doing it normally in a disadvantage to the offense. Now, turnover luck is a real thing. I think you're not going to see, like, Jerome Bland's not going to have the year that he had the year prior. Like, if you go and look analytically, turnovers are actually something that are completely, there's a ton of noise. It's very inconsistent. Zone defenses tend to have more, because your vision, you're seeing the ball, see ball, get ball. Cover one teams tend to have a little bit more pass deflections, PBUs, things of that, maybe a kind of more sacks, hurries, things of that nature, just because everything's super tight. But interceptions, to me, I don't think are what defines a player. I think it is an added value stat. So if you do have a lot of interceptions, you're being placed you're near the ball. Typically, when you're near the ball, you're playing good defense. But I do think that it fluctuates from year to year. And then you do have those outliers. Like Deron Bland, again, there's only been two seasons in NFL history that have even come close. He's one of them. So, I mean, you look at how long that is, and then just how often we're passing now. So I do think that it's kind of a noisy stat, and it doesn't necessarily show how good you are as a DB.
It's interesting that you say man corners tend to get fewer opportunities, because again, they're following the man. They're not looking back at the ball. Now, and as Jets fans, like the classic example is Antonio Cromartie, who had like 10 interceptions one year, since I think his second year with the Chargers, and then never had more than 3 again in his career. You have Trayvon Diggs a couple years ago, whatever it was, a ridiculous number of interceptions, but he also allowed over 1,000 yards in coverage. So, there's between those two things, like just the fluctuation and also the risks that you're taking generally when you're going for interceptions, that it just seems like, as kind of, as you said, as important as turnovers are, they are also just impossible to predict. Now, that being said, Sauce dropped like 4 or 5 interception opportunities last year.
Yeah, and so that goes down as a pass breakup, which are still important. I do think, like, dropped interceptions, when you see that, the Jets do play a lot of zone coverage. And so you do typically, so they have the opportunity. It's just, can we finish and can we compete? That's the thing with Diggs and Bland when they had their 2 standout years, is that they caught the balls that were thrown to them. And I think that that's a lot of the things with the DBs is dropped interceptions, just like we now track drop passes for receivers. Those can actually have an effect on the quarterback as well, because you're looking at, the quarterback's like, oh crap, I almost threw an interception. So that can have just as much an effect on it as an actual interception. So overall, I think sacks and interceptions can be a little bit weighted, kind of overrated, because sacks really is more, it can be more of a quarterback stat. Is he holding the ball? And also, it's kind of an indictment on the offensive line. You watch some of these tapes, and you put some of these guys on top of weaker offensive linemen, and it's not going to work out for the offensive line. And so, to me, that those 2 stats in particular don't necessarily tell the whole story, but they are kind of like what you go off of for having a spectacular season.
Okay, and that just brings me back to Sauce for a minute. I don't know if you saw ESPN's top 10, their top 10 rankings based on what they asked coaches, like scouts, executives, and different people around the league. And Sauce was ranked the number 3 corner, which aligns with what you said. But apparently one executive said that he's extremely overrated, and another one said like he's the most overrated player in the league, and another one said that he could be called for holding on every play. So based on what you see, like, is that accurate, and how much does it matter?
I think he is a little handsy, but I think a lot of that has to do with the length. I mean, you look at a guy like Reek Woolen for the Seattle Seahawks, who's probably the most freakish athlete in the NFL. The dude's 6'4", 215, 210 pounds. And is a man corner. I mean, so there's going to be times when you're 6'3", you're going up against some smaller receivers, even a 6-foot receiver, you're going to have a little bit handsy. I think a lot of it has to do with he's so long and lean that he kind of looks goofy sometimes. And so when you are watching him, he kind of looks like every once in a while, he'll look like the crazy inflatable tube man that you see on the side of the road, and his arms are going, and but he's so athletic and bendy, and that's how his body is. And so when you really break down his technique, which I did in that video that you were talking about earlier, you really start seeing he is a technician. It's just sometimes he just kind of looks a little bit goofy because of his length and how long he is. I think a lot of it too has to do, I call it kind of like the left-handed effect. Like why do people why is there so much hate for Tua? And I know I'm talking about it, and I know there's a lot of hate for Tua over here, but a lot of it comes from the fact that he's left-handed. And so when we're so right-hand dominant as a society, when you see something like that, I'm sure you've seen where people have flipped his throwing motion, like they flip it and they make him look like he's right-handed, and people are like, dude, this guy's awesome, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a little bit we're so used to having these 5'10", 5'11", 6-foot corners. When we see a longer guy, we see how handsy they are. We're also in an offensive dominant league. I think people really don't understand the 5-yard rule, where you can put hands on a receiver. And so therefore, I think too, people don't understand what is actually in phase and out of phase with the receiver. In phase means I'm in control of the receiver. I'm in a dominant position for the pass. And so I think a lot of that comes with it. And then to just, if you throw an arbitrary list of players out there, everybody's going to be mad about it. And everybody loves their team. And so therefore you're always going to have somebody that's overrated and somebody that's underrated.
Okay, that definitely tracks. I love the example of Tua and comparing it to Sauce. I've never heard that before, but it's an excellent comparison. It's interesting you mentioned. So we talked about DJ Reed. I think 38% of the yards he gave up last year were to the Miami Dolphins. I mean, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle annihilated him. So I guess my question is, which defensive backs generally have more success against the Miami, duo? How much does that have to do with Tua having a struggling to throw in cold weather? And I mean, just in general, how can you contain Miami's receivers?
I think it's more of a unit grade. How high is the unit grade? And then what are you doing? I think if you're playing a ton of cover one, you're going to be running. You turn it into a track meet. And I always tell my DBs all the time when I'm coaching DBs, when I'm talking to DBs, when I'm consulting with DBs, it's look, we don't want to create track meets. We are running backwards. They're running forward. They're already really good at running forward. We don't want to get into a track meet where we're constantly racing. And so I think teams that play cover one a lot, which the Jets do, they're going to struggle. Where are you creating outlets? We know that the Dolphins run a ton of crossing routes, right? These deep crossing routes. So where are your outlets? And that's where I think teams that really layer the back end of their coverage really kind of work together as a unit. It's more of a whole unit and not necessarily we've got a really good corner and we've got another really good corner. We can match them up and then they run together, because we already know that that's not going to work against the Dolphins. They use too much quick motion. They move guys around. They do an excellent job of just kind of getting you in a mismatch. So it comes down to more of the unit as a whole. In terms of Tua, I do really think if you go and you look at it, he struggles to throw outside. So when you pack the hash, when you cut the crossers, when you don't give them free access in the middle of the field, it really makes him struggle because now he has to throw outside. What they don't want to do is play hero ball. They don't want to throw the fade routes outside. They don't want to constantly be throwing deep post routes, deep over routes, deep just where you're pushing everything down the field. And that's a little bit of an indictment on Tua's arm strength in terms of like he just doesn't have a cannon like a Jordan Love or even like a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, where it's just like they can throw, it feels like they can just throw a 70-yard bomb with the flick of the wrist. That's just not Tua's game, but he's elite in accuracy, which goes, so that's kind of that dichotomy of a coach is if we go man, we know we're going to be in a trap. If we go zone, he's just going to pick us apart underneath. So it really, to me, playing then, it comes down to, can you control the line of scrimmage? Can you accelerate the read for Tua and get him off of the deeper pass? Like I thought the Chiefs did an excellent job in both of their games of really pinpointing their pressures in certain areas that made Tua really hold the ball, which eventually leads to him getting sacked, him throwing errant throws. And so, they even played a lot of press, a lot of man. They changed it up. And I think defenses like that have a better blueprint for than, hey, we just do two things. We do it really well, and we're really simple. So I think that's kind of where the Jets have struggled in the past is they don't blitz. They're kind of a simplistic defense. They're kind of, I call it static because they don't necessarily move. They don't have a lot of middle. Actually, I think they have the lowest rates of middle of the field disguise, meaning what you see is what you get pre-snap. They don't blitz. I think their blitz rate is one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the NFL. It's well below, I think it's below, I think it was like 16%. It's well below 20%,
exactly.
which is insane. They line up and they play football. And I think when you do that and you play matchup football like the Jets want to do, you run into situations like the Dolphins where they have equal talent as you do. So now it comes back on the scheme. It comes back on where are our curveballs that we're throwing. And that to me is that matchup for the Jets and the Dolphins.
Very enlightening point. I really appreciate it. Since you mentioned the Jets simplistic coverage, look, there are other teams besides the Dolphins that have, multiple really good receivers. So how did the Jets maintain, let's say, again, really good defensive play, even though they're so simplistic? Like you would think, again, what you see is what you get, what's coming. It doesn't take a Mike McDaniel or Kyle Shanahan to figure out shouldn't to kind of figure things out.
Yeah, I think the defensive line that they've curated over the past couple of years really is what it comes down to. Their pressure rate is very high. So what I always like to look at is like, what is your blitz rate versus what is your pressure rate? So are you creating pressure with blitzes or are you creating pressure with just your front forward? The Jets are constantly high in pressure rate and low in blitz rate, which means they have a very talented front. I think what they've done inside too, they have some of the best interior defensive line. Quinnen Williams is just an absolute monster inside. What that does is it pulls everything inside. So all the protection has to be inside. Speaking of East, you're very well versed in Tom Brady. What's the one thing Tom Brady hated? He hated pressure in his face. No quarterback likes that. And if you want to make an elite quarterback, an average quarterback, get pressure in his face. Well, how do you do that? You have a dominant interior defensive line, but then it amplifies your edges because now they're one-on-one. So if you look at kind of how the 49ers have built their roster, who are very similar to the Jets. If you look at what the Packers are going to do under Hafley and how they've kind of retooled their roster, who is, again, they run the same system. You go and you look at what the Texans have done. So this is kind of that Shanahan 49ers San Francisco system that was kind of developed in 2018. That they really want to rely on a dominant front, athletic linebackers, which the Jets have, to get that intermediate coverage. And then they want to have kind of a secondary that can play diverse, like within a cover one and quarters, where to answer the coverage question for you, how are the Jets good and how do they match up? Running quarters is kind of man with rules, but it layers the middle of the field when taught correctly. And it gives you a lot of opportunity to do some inverted stuff where you're dropping the safety, make it look like cover three. Quarterback thinks that, okay, I'm in close post coverage. but then it ends up being more of a quarters look. So that's what I think the Jets really do. And I've talked about the Jets quarter scheme before. I think Ulrich and Saleh do a great job of layering things together. Typically, you're going to pair that with cover one. That's what if you watch the Packers this year, that's what they're going to do. I think the 49ers will probably play a little bit more cover one, just going kind of rolling it back and going back to what they were doing with Saleh. So to me, that is where the Jets have an opportunity to kind of defend a lot of these teams, is because if they need to go man, they can, but that quarter structure that they use really helps that layer in the middle of the field, which is where a lot of the passes are targeted.
So since you mentioned the Jets defensive line, where do you think cornerback, like let's say if you had to rank positions, not just defensive positions, but overall positions in the NFL in terms of importance, where would you rank cornerback? And I guess coupled with that is kind of like, do you think cornerback play drives defense, like makes it, like coverage makes it easier for defensive line, or defensive line makes it easier for coverage, or some combination?
Yeah, that's the chicken and the egg question of football, especially defensively. Is it D-line? Is it defensive back play? And really, to be honest with you, it all starts up front. If you have an elite defensive line, it really cleans up a lot of the things in the back end. We're not covering for 4 seconds. We're not, it accelerates the time for the quarterback, which allows for tighter coverage in the back end. I'll just tell you, you can be, you can have Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed all you want, but if you're having to cover Waddle and Hill for over 3 seconds, you're going to lose more than you win. And I think that's kind of the thing of where the front is and where people kind of lose. You remember, a premier position like corner is super important. But it's only one player on the field, whereas you can really, with the front four and even with a good interior defense, like you can add numbers back in, right? The offense is going to have to allocate numbers to a certain guy. Maybe they leave a tight end in, maybe they leave a running back in. But to your point about importance, I think we're seeing this, especially in the last 3 years in the draft, is teams are really trying to collect edges and they're trying to collect corners. You just draft until you hit one, right? You draft a corner every year, you draft an edge every year. It doesn't matter where, just you do it off the board. If you can get a premium guy, you go for it. If you can't, you just draft off value later. And so I think what you want and what you're seeing is we're seeing where people are really starting to notice where position value is. It's valuable in corner, it's valuable in edge, but who got paid this offseason? A bunch of interior defensive linemen. So don't ever sleep on, just because they don't get a lot of the talk, don't ever sleep on the interior defensive line and then the line as a whole as being kind of that key cog in the defense that translates everything back. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have no corners, it don't matter. So, and that's part of the problem. But a good pass rush amplifies your secondary. A great secondary doesn't necessarily amplify your pass rush.
I mean, I really, hearing that from a guy whose defense very interesting. No, it's very illuminating to me. So since you mentioned drafting guys, I don't know if you've had a chance to dig deep into the well and watch, or you heard about Quantas Stiggers, whom the Jets drafted in the 5th round. I don't know, what are the differences for a guy who played in the CFL and coming to the NFL, and do you think he has any chance of carving out a niche in the NFL?
Yeah, that's the thing about like the NFL. I think people want these high dollar guys and they want their first round, but there's story after story after story of an undrafted free agent or a guy lower in the draft that ends up popping and ends up being a starter. I mean, you just go down the list and there's just guys. In fact, the 2022 class of cornerback is one of the greatest class. I mean, we're talking like a who's who of the next best corners. And a lot of them are 4th round draft picks. So can a guy come from the CFL and maybe even push for playing time in the NFL? Of course you can. And again, it goes back to that collection of corners. You've got to have deep. Look, football is a game of attrition. We are not guaranteed that, and you guys know this better than anybody. You're not guaranteed that your star player is going to even make it past the first drive of a game, right? So we're not guaranteed that Sauce is going to play all 17 games. DJ Reed's going to play all 17. Carter's going to play all 17. You've got to have depth in football, and you've got to have depth primarily in those positions like receiver, corner, these speed, high-dollar positions. Now, it's a little different on defense because you don't sub as much. But it gives them an opportunity that if they can have a 4-corner package out there, a dime package with 4 corners, to me, I think a guy like that, obviously he got picked up by the Jets. It will be interesting to see like how much he plays. These are kind of camp guys. You get a lot of notoriety and then you kind of forget until like week 10. DJ Reed pulls a hammy and he goes in there and you're like, oh, I totally forgot about that guy. Yeah, okay, sweet. I think he's good, So usually you don't talk about your 4th corner, but there's no reason why he can't play.
Okay. Now I don't know exactly when, with match quarters, I don't know if you had a chance to like look a lot at Darrelle Revis and Richard Sherman. I don't know if because they were constantly going back and forth on social media and there was a big debate about who was better, but obviously their style, what they were asked to do in their defenses were very different. So based on your perspective, I mean, I don't know if I should ask which cornerback was better, but I guess can you describe like each player's technique and kind of what you've ever seen on them, because Jet fans really want to know about Darrelle Revis.
Yeah, this is like apples to oranges. And this is why I love like what we're doing at Field Vision, being able to kind of separate out, just doing it by play and kind of doing zone versus man. I wrote an article. In fact, if you go to fieldvisionsports.com, go to hit the blog, I actually write about top man versus zone corners. And the reason why I wanted to do that is for this argument here. Darrelle Revis is a Hall of Fame man corner. He's an on-ball corner. He presses. He is up in the receiver's grill. He's there. He's going to be sticky, right? These are physically dominant people, and typically their career arc is very short, just like Revis was. Man, he hit 30 and it was over, right? They're very much like running backs. Okay, you get to 30, you kind of slow down. You're an on-ball corner. You really don't have zone skills. I'm not saying that Revis can't play zone. It's just that's not what he was asked to do. Then you have a guy like Richard Sherman that's long. He's a kick stepper, meaning that he is the reason why I think you can have a conversation now about not necessarily being a backpedaler at DB. I think forever everybody was like, we got to be able to backpedal. And I think with Richard Sherman and his kick step and the way he was able to kind of zone slide out and played in that vision and reaction, we're in a zone dominant universe right now in the NFL. Man coverage rates have kind of plummeted the past 5 years. And I think it's what we highlighted with the Dolphins, just so much movement. It's funny. Now we're talking about NFL offenses like they're basketball teams. Like, oh, it's a motion offense. It's like they've got this power slot here. They got this guy over here, and so there's not a true, X receiver Megatron guy anymore. So I think when you start to like look at that and you break those two down, they're two completely different corners. Are they both good at what they did? Yes. Were they elite? Were they have dominant defenses? Yes. But we're not really comparing them correctly. I think Sherman, can he play man? Yes. But was he better at zone? Of course. Revis, can he play zone? Yes. But is he an elite man guy? Of course. So to me, that's why. And then again, it's kind of like the Michael Jordan, LeBron argument as well. They're like really completely different players. They're in two different eras. Now, those two played in a similar era, but it's kind of that of like, we're really not talking about the same player per se. And that's kind of that argument. I think both of them are great. Both of them are Hall of Fame candidates. And both played a completely different game in terms of skill set and then also how they were asked to play.
So it's interesting you mentioned about Revis, or man corners, that their time tends to be short, because one question I was going to ask you, do cornerbacks in general age poorly, or do you feel like zone corners have a longer shelf life? Like how does aging affect, like, let's say, or declining foot speed affect corners? Why do some of them move to safety later in their careers? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
And it goes back to the zone. Patrick Peterson is a good example of a guy who was always really good at zone, kind of transitioned from zone corner to a safety to kind of like a hybrid in out guy. I mean, even last year for the Steelers, he was very good in zone coverage. So I think that read and react, it's just hours and hours of tape and watching and playing the game. And so as you get older, your foot speed goes down. So if you're an on-ball dominant player, meaning that you press a lot, you play man a lot, like a guy who's going to struggle in his 30s is probably like a guy like AJ Terrell, who presses 70% of the time, is on ball all the time. His career arc will probably be, if you're talking to GMs, his career arc is probably a second contract, and then that's probably it. Whereas a guy like, I think Sauce has an opportunity to play because he can play some zone coverage. He's good at it. He's long, so he can kind of manufacture a lot like a Richard Sherman. You kind of just end up becoming this zone corner towards the end of your career. Patrick Peterson's a great example of this just last year. So I do think, like you said, the zone aspect of football lends itself to them being able to play like a free safety type, being able, you can still play coverage, you just play from depth, you kind of have vision, you're really good at it. I try and tell young corners all the time, start playing more off man coverage. Don't just necessarily always default to press. I think that's kind of the easy button a lot of the times, especially when you're like in high school and you're just better than everybody. College, you're better, the talent differential is so much wider. And then you get to the NFL and it's like, I can't press Tyreek Hill 90% of the time like I did when I was playing at some Power 5 school or a G5 school, right? That's not going to work anymore. I've got to have tools in the tool belt. And that's typically where I think you're seeing a transition in the NFL. They're asking guys to do a little bit more. And that transition is part of that zone. You got to be able to play more zone in the NFL. You got to be able to play division reaction. So I do think we're going to see corners elongate their careers. Darius Williams for the Rams is a great example of somebody that got paid to come back to the Rams at 31 years old. Why is he still talked about as one of the better corners in the NFL? He plays a lot of zone. He's diverse in it. And he's good at all of them. So I think that kind of illuminates kind of your question of where you see the drop off. If all you do is physicality, you're going to see a drop off after 30. If you don't, you might be able to elongate your career maybe for a third or a fourth contract.
Very interesting. I really appreciate everything you brought on. I wanted to ask you two things. I wanted to give you an opportunity to plug your own stuff, but I guess first I wanted to, and this could be where you plug your own stuff, but I wanted to ask you, for people who, let's say, again, people look at me, they see I'm a woman, they say, you never played the game, which is true. But even for anyone who either played at a low level or just wants to understand more about defense in general, specifically defensive back play, which is complex and very often hard to understand if you haven't been immersed in it. What resources would you recommend for like learning from the basics to more complex and, again, your own stuff, anyone else's stuff, how you got started, whatever, anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion would not necessarily go to matchcourse.com, but go to my YouTube channel. I got tons of free clinics on defensive back play. In fact, I have a whole DB 101 playlist. I think it's like 30 videos long. A lot of them were like COVID videos. I was doing DB drills and explaining stuff in my backyard. But I kind of took those, made a playlist. I would start there. Like if you're like, Cody, what resource can I have that I want to learn more? That's where I would just start, because I just go over that. Then if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, I've got clinics. Go to my clinic archive on matchcourse.com and just start watching. The technique video that you said was Sauce, like that's free. You can watch that on YouTube. You can watch that on Match Quarters. If you really want to learn more, there's so many resources. Just listen to the defensive backs play, right? Or talk about their play. Find videos on Sauce Gardner breaking down tape or talking about how he's playing. That's probably generally, you want to start where you're interested in. So obviously these are Jets fans. Go on YouTube, find Sauce Gardner videos of where he's actually talking about how he's playing football, what he's looking at, how he's reacting. I think to me, that kind of illuminates what they're trying to do and in their mind, and it gets you going. If you're interested in quarters, primarily what the Jets run, I have a guidebook on it. You can find it if you can go to Amazon and just type in Match Quarters, or you can go to matchquarters.com, click books. It'll take you to I have 6 books total that you can watch, or that you can read on defense. Match Quarters is one of them. So my advice is just start small and build up. If you have questions, ask. I actually have a defensive glossary that I put together from all the top. So if you hear a term you don't know, just go in there and search it up. Use a finder tool. Ask questions. I typically will answer. If you follow me on Twitter, you DM me, I'll probably answer you at some point. So those are all things. Just ask questions. If you've got a son in high school, talk to the DB coach about, what they're trying to do, anything. Just be a lifelong learner.
Okay. So I just wanted to get to a few comments that we had. So this is Dom C, who does a lot of his own film work. He said, Cody is the best, great guest, Rivka. So thanks, Cody, for joining. Let's just see if there's a couple. I'm gonna get to more comments the other day, but I mean, like afterward. But I wanted to see if there are any questions for you. No, a lot of these are comments for me. Looks like, so I'll get to them, but so Cody, thank you so much for joining. I think you're the best guest I ever had. So I would appreciate it. Again, I would love to have you on again to talk more general defense during the season, to talk about what you've seen. Thank you so much for responding to my Substack. I wasn't really expecting a response. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Anytime I can talk defensive back play, like I'll talk to a wall about defensive back play. So no problem here. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Be well. Okay, I'm gonna continue answering some comments.
Okay, appreciate it.
Take care. Be well.
All right, bye.
Okay, so I guess it doesn't look like Dakota is here. Let's see, John, I appreciate it. Let's see some of the other comments. Yeah, John, it was a funny comment, a stack of nickels, right? Who's filling it for Carter? What he meant is in the run game, he very often has a safety on top of him, or who's, let's say, filling in, covering him, so that if he can't, he's small, if he can't, let's say, who kind of covers his gap, so that if someone gets past him, it's not going to be a touchdown. Most important stat is keeping opponents out of the end zone. Obviously, sacks are not overrated. I think what he means is that I guess I could have pressed him on it, but I was talking more defensive back play this time, because I talk about how sacks are overrated compared to pressures. As important as sacks are in the game, in general, I think what he's saying is just that, like, sacks tend to fluctuate to some extent. Not as much as interceptions, but he's saying the stat tends to be not as important. He had 2 pick sixes. He dropped, still affects the quarterback timing. That's what Cody said. So yes, he did drop. He dropped at least 1 pick six against Dallas. I don't remember if the other picks were definitely sixes, maybe Denver. But yeah, Sauce, I mean, Salah talked about it, how basically his thing is to catch, his challenge is to catch a ball. I wrote an article about how he kind of claps the ball. He puts his hands like this. And so, or like this. And so you're not going to be able to catch the ball that way. So yeah, hopefully Sauce gets working on that, because he had several opportunities this year and he messed up all of them. Sacks are opportunity killers. That's definitely the case. But I mean, if you think about a guy like Bryce Huff, I mean, I know he had 10 sacks last year, but in general, his sack rates are not nearly as high as some other, let's say, defensive linemen or pass rushers. Meaning on a per snap basis. And I think a lot of the reason for it is that pressure and consistently affecting the quarterback is more important than getting a sack, but not affecting the quarterback the rest of the game. So let's say, I keep saying, a guy like Hassan Reddick for several seasons of his career has been a sack artist, but he's not necessarily consistent with it. So that consistency also matters. It's not to minimize that, sacks. Getting to the quarterback and being as efficient, as consistent in getting to the quarterback as Reddick has been is unbelievable. But I'm just saying, personally, I mean, again, it's a little different because Reddick can play the run, whereas Bryce Huff couldn't play the run. But purely as a pass rusher, I think I preferred Huff to Reddick, because Huff will affect the quarterback more consistently, even if he doesn't necessarily get the sack. Sacks help cause picks too. That's kind of what Cody was saying. He was saying that it starts with the defensive line and pressure up the middle. That's what he was saying about Brady, what he was saying about Quinnen Williams. And so, yes, getting to the quarterback, and it plays with their minds, and it does cause picks. John, Sauce does his homework. Yes, Sauce absolutely does his homework. He's one of the most studied and prepared corners in the NFL. There was a video that Brett Coleman, check out his work on YouTube. He's great. He did a whole video on Sauce in his rookie season. What he said is, if you recall, Stephon Diggs in his first rep against Sauce beat him for a 42-yard gain. And what he was saying is the reason that happened is Sauce had studied the film and knew that Diggs had never run a vertical route out of that particular set. And so he was jumping the short routes like the hitch or something like that because he knew that Diggs never did it. But because the Bills knew that Sauce watches so much film, they knew that he would see that, and therefore they ran a vertical. It was this cat and mouse game with a rookie. And that's how well prepared Sauce is. And just the fact that he got beat shows how good he is. It's just a testament to how much he studies and how elite he is. It's not just his elite physical talent, it's also his mind. Jets number one defensive backs is exciting. Yeah, no, definitely. Never thought I'd see the day of what? Okay, sacks deflate your team's soul, definitely. Hit the like. I appreciate Curly. I would appreciate definitely any likes. We got an offensive line. Let's go. Hopefully they can stay healthy. Sauce will travel this year again. Albrecht kind of walked that back, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. Jesse from Saved by the Bell said it best. I'm so excited. Sometimes I wake up in a nightmare and Rodgers got hurt again or everything went wrong. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason to be excited as a Jet fan. Sack Tua. It's really hard to sack Tua because he gets rid of the ball so quickly. It is not easy to get to Tua. And that's one thing about the Dolphins offensive line. And that's why as Robert Hunt getting $20 million per year with the Carolina, I'm not so certain he's going to play anywhere near the level he did in Miami because he just wasn't asked to do much in Miami. Tua got the ball out in like 2.2 seconds. Like he was getting the ball out faster than Tom Brady at the end of his career. And so it's not easy to sack Tua. And Miami, as Cody said, it's a bad matchup for the Jets, and they're going to have to figure out and maybe change their approach a little bit for playing Miami. Our offense will keep their offense off the field. Could be. I mean, again, Miami's defense has some good players. I mean, Ramsey's still really good. Kendall Fuller is very underrated on the other side. One of the better corners in the league over the last 5 years. They still have Chubb and Phillips if they're healthy. Both had great years last year. I know they lost Wilkins. Their linebacking core is kind of iffy, but Miami's defense, don't underestimate them because they could be pretty good. Obviously, losing Vic Fangio hurts, but I still think you should not completely underestimate Miami. Miami not good overall. That's just not true. I mean, you can argue that they're not just Tua can't throw in the cold weather, and so they can't be good teams, especially in the playoffs. But that they're not a good team is just underestimating. CJ getting that pick on Tua in the red zone will be epic. I mean, was it CJ who was it? I think they asked CJ who he wanted to. Yeah, they asked Mosley yesterday. Kay Adams asked Mosley who he'd want to pick, and he said Tua. And so you have to hope that it happened. Tua panic versus the Jets, head bouncing off the turf hard like a pinball. He definitely didn't play well in the first game against the Jets. Tua and Josh Allen struggled versus Jets. Allen actually had a great game in his second game against the Jets. Threw for like over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. And not all of that was in garbage time. So he played pretty well in the second game. Tua obviously Allen really struggled in the first week, although, this is where you get into it about Allen. He threw up a couple of balls into double coverage when he could have just run for the first down. And so that's constantly Allen's issue and against the Jets, he seems to, when he doesn't turn the ball over, things go well. But when he tries to play hero ball, things don't go well. And so, Allen and the Jets seem to have his number a bit. Tua, not as much, but they still played well against him in the first game. So we'll see. Best Jets roster ever. I tend to agree, at least on paper. I think people wildly overrate the 2008 to 10 teams. Not to say that those rosters weren't good, but they were very heavily like offensive line oriented. And Chris Jenkins in 2008, but they didn't have, other than Revis, they didn't have a ton of talent on the defenses, especially defensive line. Cody was talking about your blitz rate versus your pressure rate. I mean, Rex had to blitz at a ridiculous rate because he didn't have anyone on the defensive line. I mean, their best edge rusher was Brian Thomas, Calvin Pace? Like, really not. He didn't really have much talent there. Jets have the advantage this year against the Dolphins' offensive line. Dolphins lost some beef on their own line. Definitely, losing Connor Williams and Robert Hunt is an issue, but the question is how much they were good versus how much Miami's scheme made them look good. And so, I've talked a lot in the past before games about how Miami's offensive line had holes, and then the Jets couldn't get anywhere near Tua because he just releases the ball so quickly. I wish no player harm or injuries except Watson. I'm not going to comment on that, but I can hear you definitely saying that. Watson experienced his whole arc, not good. I mean, I'm shocked, honestly, at how he's fallen off. Missing a year, you'd think in his second year he'd be better. It looks like he can't even throw the football. Everything's low. Everything's like, it's shocking. On the bright side, Watson actually cost himself money in the long run. I mean, he got a pretty big guaranteed deal. He's set for life. He was on the way to becoming the Michael Jordan of football. Now he's just a bum. I don't know about that, but he was definitely a hands down top 5 to 10 quarterback in the NFL. And it's crazy. Yeah, hats off to his agent. I mean, total smoke job. Garrett, all business in 2024. Exactly. So Michael Carter and the safeties become more important. So I think Cody may have underrated Michael Carter a bit, in terms of nickel corners, especially after watching Blewett's review of Carter. But he's kind of saying, that the back end of the coverage is very important for the Jets. If you want to go back in the comments and repeat exactly what you were responding to and where your question comes from, I'd be glad to get more into it. The front office has to be effective, and the back's got to clean up the mess. If you're talking about, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. Sauce and Garrett going to break our bank in 2025. So Rich Cimini made an interesting point when I had him on. He said, so Sauce, they're going to lock up. But Garrett, he's not 100% sure about. I mean, to me, it's hard to contemplate them not locking up Garrett because they don't have any other receiver to pay. But he said Garrett's going to be interesting to watch, and so we'll see if he puts up the year that he wants. JJ is also interesting because they have a 5th-year option for JJ, and there's a good chance they might want to ride out his 5th-year option. Not that he's going to let them; he would hold out. But you have to see how he plays because ultimately, if he's a top 20 edge that wants to be paid like a top 5 or a top 2, you have to ask yourself if it's worth paying him. Now, Cody said that defensive line is the most important, and in that sense, you pay defensive linemen. But you have to see how JJ is because last year was about maybe 15th to 20th best edge rusher in the NFL. That's not good enough to be paid like a top 5 edge rusher. And, that's my point with Hassan Reddick. He's a top 10 to 15 edge rusher in the NFL. He's not top 2. He doesn't deserve to be paid like Nick Bosa. Even though he gets the sacks of Nick Bosa, he's not the pressure. He's not the disruptor that Nick Bosa is. And so, I kind of feel with JJ, they're going to have a very interesting decision. You said JJ's the odd man out. Probably Jets praying for McDonald. JJ might get franchised. I tend to agree, although I think JJ is always going to be a better edge setter than McDonald. So we'll see how McDonald turns out as a pass rusher. I think Brees is also going to be the odd man out. We'll see about JJ. I think they'll pay Sauce and Garrett. Brees, if Douglas is around or any sort of similar general manager, I think Brees might go the Saquon Barkley way, where they don't even have the 5th-year option, but where they franchise him and then they let him go. Let's say, unless JJ goes bananas in 2024, exactly. If he really takes another leap and he becomes like a 12-sack guy and constantly causing pressure and affecting the quarterback, maybe things change. But as of now, the way he is now, we'll see what happens with him. I love JJ too. Yeah. His origin story is good. Jets are hated around the league. I love that. Jets known as the new social media divas around the NFL now, league now, LOL. But a lot of it has to do with Rodgers. But honestly, Sauce should get off social media. Like, that would probably be a smart thing to do. Not that he's like confrontational or anything, but it would probably be a good idea for him to just get off. Still got to watch Garrett's origin. It's kind of cool. I mean, Garrett grew up, like, you could kind of tell that his family was a big driver in his success. It was a good episode. I have to say, Garrett's was the only one I watched, which is probably terrible for someone who covers the Jets, but here I am admitting. Revis was a chief boss, yeah, but he's said a lot of stupid things since after he plays. It's honestly hard to even deal with him. Poorly in motion, LOL. Yeah, we'll see how much he plays, but he's going in motion a lot. We finally have some footballs tonight, Gems and Jets. The Hall of Fame game we saw last year, not too many people play. DJ Reed needs to get back to where he was 2 years ago. They're working him in practice. Are you talking about his first year with the Jets versus his second? Because I think he definitely played better in his first year overall, but he kind of cheats a lot, and he gets beat sometimes and it doesn't show up on his film. So what you saw against Miami was kind of them taking advantage of things that had always been there. Look, I think Reed is good, and obviously Alexander said that he had they project Reed to be the number 8 corner in the NFL. He was number 12 last year. But there's definitely some holes in his game that can be exploited. How great was Dion? So I wish I had seen this question because I would have asked Cody. I do hope I can get him back on again because that was just an excellent interview. And as a stats person, I love it how he incorporated just a lot of statistical concepts into what he said. So you'll maybe get to ask him then. Corley is all over. I can't wait to see this new kickoff thing. I mean, he's not the only one who has obviously Tariq Cohen retiring gives him a better chance, but we have to see who ends up being the kick returner because other guys have been getting a chance also. You're saying Dion was a level above, so he was before my time, but obviously I know his reputation. Let's see. Sacks are impact plays, pressures are cumulative plays. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, pressures are impact plays too. If you watched how many times Bryce Huff caused errant passes or Quinnen, there were a lot of times with that. Cohen just retired. He did. It was announced. Miami's not a pushover. We are better, though. Garrett versus Ramsey. Ramsey's not dancing at the party. Look, Ramsey's pretty good, but Garrett beat him pretty decisively last year. It's just that the Jets quarterback stunk. So I'm not so worried about Garrett against Ramsey. Okay, we have all the comments finished. Thank you so much, guys, so much for joining. Again, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com. Discount code 80. Again, you get Joe Blewett's full 2.5-hour reviews. You know, Cody is like, again, really good with analyzing general defensive back play. Blewett gives you the rundown on every single player on the Jets. He did like over 30, maybe close to 40 reviews this offseason. And so you get to watch all of them and not just the 15-minute snippet on YouTube if you subscribe to jetsxfactor.com. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day.